Under Spokane's burning sun, Officer Jeremy Carter walked quietly beside Lucky, the German shepherd whose sharp eyes carried unshakable loyalty. Along the glowing riverbank where heat rose from stone, Lucky suddenly stopped, nose tracing a trail hidden from human sight. Tiny footprints mingled with dried blood. From that moment, their path shifted, drawing them toward a truth both fragile and deeply moving. Beyond the veil of willows, something waited. Something that would change everything. What did Lucky discover that day? Watch the video to find out. The Spokane River shimmered beneath a sky that had burned since morning. The rocks along its edge glowed with trapped heat, turning each step into a test of patience. Air wavered above the basalt like glass bent in a furnace. Summer here was not gentle. It pressed against the lungs and made every sound feel heavy. Officer Jeremy Carter walked the narrow trail with steady rhythm, his boots crunching over gravel. The weight of 2 decades in uniform sat on his shoulders. Yet his stride carried a calm that belonged to habit. His shirt clung with sweat, his campaign hat, shaded eyes that had learned to watch carefully and expect little comfort from the world. Beside him padded Lucky, his partner of 7 years. The German shepherd's sable coat caught the sun in dark waves. His frame was solid chest, broad legs, powerful. Amber eyes moved with quiet judgment, reading the land as if it spoke in scents and signals. The scar on his left ear tip, jagged and pale, marked a story of training and survival. Lucky did not need words. He spoke in glances, in the way he leaned near Jeremy's leg, in the way he angled his body toward unseen movement. Their bond had formed through long patrols, silent nights, and sudden alarms. Jeremy trusted Lucky with more than duty. The dog had become a constant presence, a reminder that loyalty could live without condition. The trail bent close to the river. Water moved, slow, glinting under the mid-afternoon sun. Yet Jeremy felt no relief in its nearness. The air smelled of warm stone and dry grass. Insects hummed in the stillness. Somewhere above, an osprey cut the sky with sharp wings. Jeremy lifted a hand to wipe his brow. His thoughts drifted, as they often did, to the silence of his own home. The framed photographs, the empty chair at the table, the space that had not been filled since grief had settled years ago. He carried it without complaint, folding sorrow into discipline. Yet each time he looked at Lucky, he felt the edges soften. The German shepherd trotted a step ahead, tail low, ears tuned to every sound. He did not need a leash here. A short lead hung loose between them, a symbol for others more than a tool. Trust bound them closer than rope. Jeremy slowed, letting the heat roll over him. The patrol sector was quiet, the kind of shift where nothing usually happened. Fishermen crouched far down river lines, slack in the current. The town behind the trees lay still, rooftops, gleaming faint under the sun's glare. He drew a long breath, grounding himself. The work demanded vigilance, even in monotony, especially in monotony. That was when mistakes came easiest. Lucky's ears pricked. His head turned sharply, nose brushing the air. Jeremy caught the shift at once. Years together had taught him to listen when the dog changed posture. The shepherd's steps slowed, weight shifting forward, as if a thread had tugged him from beneath the earth. Jeremy's gaze followed. At first he saw only dust along the trail's edge, gray soil cracked by sun. Then faint impressions broke the surface. Small, uneven, barely holding shape in the loose grit. Beside them, a darker mark clung to stone. Brown, dried, yet clear. Lucky lowered his muzzle, drawing in the scent with careful breaths. His body tensed, a bowstring pulled. Jeremy's heartbeat steadied. His hand brushed the radio at his shoulder, but did not press the call yet. He crouched, eyes tracing the fragile prints. They were too small for an adult, scattered as though made by stumbling steps. The heat pressed closer, but Jeremy felt a chill cut through the air. He straightened slowly, eyes narrowing along the path ahead. "Lead," he murmured to Lucky. The shepherd surged forward with purpose, nose to ground, tail straight, pulling into the mystery that waited beyond the willows. Jeremy adjusted his grip, every sense alive. The still patrol had shifted. Something lay ahead. The air stilled as Jeremy followed Lucky deeper along the narrow track. The shepherd pressed low shoulders, rolling with controlled strength, each step a compass needle. The leash pulled tight, and Jeremy let at his eyes, sweeping the ground. More impressions showed themselves as the trail wound between basalt outcrops. Each one was small, set too close together for steady balance. They staggered, crossed over, dragged in places. The pattern told a story of weakness, of a body moving without strength. Jeremy crouched again, brushing his fingertips across the faint outline of a heel. The soil had dried hard, around the mark holding it longer than it should have. A streak of brown trailed nearby, flaked and brittle on stone. His throat tightened as the shape grew clear. Blood. Lucky's ears twitched, his head swinging side to side as if chasing threads only he could sense. He moved forward again, muzzle near the dust tail rigid, then paused. His nose pressed close to a sharp edge of basalt, where a smear of rusty stain clung to the rock. He breathed in, exhaled, then snapped his head toward the brush. Jeremy rose, scanning the thicket of willow and grass beyond. Heat shimmered over the green, but the shadows underneath held stillness too heavy for ordinary quiet. His palm hovered near the radio again. Calling it in now would bring the noise of sirens, the crush of strangers. But Lucky's steady pull told him the moment was not yet for noise. The officer's voice was low, steady. "Show me." Lucky threaded through the brush, body weaving between branches. His movements sharpened, no longer exploring, but leading. Jeremy pushed after him, boots grinding against stone, his breath shallow under the glare. Every instinct told him the distance between prints and stain was closing towards something human. The air grew cooler under the willows. Shade wrapped around them, carrying the smell of damp earth mixed with sweat and river stone. Jeremy's senses tightened, his gaze, tracing the scatter of broken stems, the pressed-down grass, the story of something small collapsing here. Lucky halted, his chest, broad muscles drawn, ears locked forward. He gave a single sharp huff, a sound that cut through the silence. His stance widened, nose angled to the earth, as though guarding more than searching now. Jeremy slowed, heart pounding in a rhythm that matched the heat in his blood. He swept his eyes across the brush, finding shapes in the shadows. Bent stalks, twisted grass, a hollow pressed into earth. For a moment the world narrowed to sound cicadas buzzing the river, dragging slow Lucky's steady breath. The prints ended here. The blood stain deepened in the soil. Something lay just beyond sight. Jeremy's grip on the leash firmed, though Lucky no longer strained. The shepherd stood, rooted amber eyes fixed ahead with the kind of certainty that left no room for doubt. Jeremy's voice was soft, meant for his partner alone. "You found it." He took a single step forward, pushing aside a veil of branches. The air beyond carried a different weight, one that made his chest tighten before he saw anything at all. Branches parted, and the hollow beneath them revealed its secret. A small figure lay curled in the dirt, pressed against roots that offered no comfort. His body seemed too light for the weight of the earth, arms thin, knees drawn tight as if trying to hide from the world. Jeremy froze for a breath, letting the picture settle. The boy was no older than 6, skin pale beneath patches of sunburned blonde hair, plastered damp across his forehead. His shirt, once white, hung torn at the shoulder, streaked with dust and blood. His lips, cracked chest rising in shallow pulls, each breath fragile as paper. Lucky lowered himself to the ground, body close to the boy, muzzle hovering, but still. His amber eyes softened, gaze fixed not on the wounds, but on the child's face, as if reminding him he was no longer alone. The shepherd did not rush. He gave presence steady and silent. The boy stirred, lashes fluttering open. Gray-blue eyes blinked at the light, unfocused, until they caught the outline of the dog beside him. A whisper slipped out, weak and broken.
"Chris!"
His voice shook, fear trembling through the single name. Jeremy's chest tightened. The sound carried more than pain. It carried terror, the kind planted deep by someone close. He knelt quickly, stripping off one glove. His fingers pressed gently at the boy's neck until he felt it. A faint, rapid pulse. Relief flickered, but only for a moment. The child was alive, but slipping fast. The boy's arm shifted, exposing bruises along his skin. Dark rings shaped by fingers that had gripped too hard. Jeremy forced the image into memory, but did not linger. There would be time later for reports, for evidence. Right now, there was only survival. "Easy, son," Jeremy murmured, voice steady, meant to anchor. He eased his outer shirt from his shoulders and wrapped it around the boy's trembling frame. The fabric swallowed him whole, but warmth settled in. Calvin, that was the name Jeremy guessed for him from the hospital band he would later wear, blinked again. His small hand lifted weakly, not toward Jeremy, but toward Lucky. The shepherd lowered his head in answer, nose brushing close, until the boy's fingers grazed fur. A sigh escaped his lips, softer than breath, as if that touch had steadied him more than any word. Jeremy met the dog's eyes. Lucky's stance was calm, yet alert, his body angled toward the boy with protective weight. It was a silent vow, one Jeremy had seen before in battlefields and back alleys. Loyal without question. The air pressed heavy under the willow, but Jeremy felt his own pulse align with the boy's faint rhythm. He leaned close, speaking low. "You're safe now. We'll get you out of here." The boy's gaze flickered, lids heavy, but a trace of trust glimmered before they sank again. His hand still rested against Lucky's fur fingers, twitching as though clinging to a lifeline. Jeremy pulled gauze from his belt pouch, pressing it gently to the torn shoulder. Blood welled but slowed under his touch. He kept the pressure steady, his free hand cradling the boy's head so it would not sink into the dirt. Above them, cicadas screamed in the heat. The world beyond the willow waited with silence, yet here in the hollow, time narrowed to 3 lives bound together, an officer, a dog, and a boy. Jeremy exhaled once, drawing resolve into his bones. The path ahead had changed. He shifted his radio, pressing it toward his lips. The call for help was next. The oath he had carried for years would now take form in this child's survival. Lucky edged closer, broad frame shielding the boy from the river's harsh breath ears, forward body still. He had become a wall, a guard, a promise. Jeremy pressed the gauze firmer against the boy's wound. Each second felt stretched, drawn long by the heat and the faint flutter of breath beneath his fingers. He leaned closer, voice steady, meant for ears that might already be drifting away. "Stay with me, son. You're safe here." The boy stirred faintly, lids trembling. His name was still unknown to Jeremy, yet he felt the weight of responsibility as though he had always carried it. The dog seemed to feel it too. Lucky had shifted to stand broadside, his flank against the boy, his chest turned to the wind. The shepherd absorbed the sun's fury, so the child would not. Jeremy unfastened his outer vest, spreading it beneath the boy to keep his body from the heated ground. He eased him onto the padded fabric, every movement measured, careful not to pull at the injured shoulder. The boy whimpered, once lips parting, then quieted when his cheek pressed against Lucky's fur. The touch calmed him more than any words. Jeremy lifted the radio, thumb brushing the worn button. His voice carried the calm of long practice. "Dispatch, this is Carter, Unit 14. I've located a juvenile male, approximate age 6. He is injured, weak pulse shoulder wound. Immediate EMT response required at Riverside Trail, Sector B. Send them fast." Static answered, then the crisp reply of confirmation. Relief did not come. There would be no relief until hands stronger than his carried the boy to safety. Jeremy looked down. The boy's chest rose in shallow rhythm. Each fragile breath pulled Jeremy deeper into a vow he had made years ago. When the badge first pressed heavy against his shirt, no life left behind. He slid one arm beneath the boy's back, the other cradling beneath his knees. The weight was shockingly slight, bones thin as kindling. Jeremy rose, careful, pressing the gauze against the shoulder wound with one hand as he lifted. The boy's head rolled gently against his chest hair, damp with sweat, against the fabric of his shirt. Lucky followed close, body brushing Jeremy's side as if guarding every step. His amber eyes never wavered, scanning the trees, the stones, the shifting shadows. Each movement declared nothing would reach the boy without passing through him first. The officer adjusted his stride along the trail. Heat pressed from below the basalt, radiating like a forge. But he held steady. His arms ached, not from weight, but from fear of failing the fragile life he carried. The boy whispered once, a sound caught between dream and wakefulness. Jeremy bent his head, catching the faintest word, Chris. Jeremy's jaw tightened. The name struck sharp, a shard of truth that hinted at the source of pain. But answers could wait. Only survival mattered here. They broke from the willow shade into raw light again. The sun bore down unforgiving, but Lucky shifted position, walking close to Jeremy's right tail, low ears, sharp body angled to shield the boy from the burning wind. The shepherd's steady presence wrapped the three of them in a circle no heat could break. Jeremy whispered again, half to the boy, half to himself. "You're not alone. Not anymore." The cicadas droned. The river groaned heavy beside them. Jeremy's boots crunched gravel as he carried the boy toward the clearing. The sound of sirens would come soon. He trusted the system for that. But the moment belonged only to this silent oath, one man, one dog, and one child bound by necessity and the promise of protection. Ahead, through the shimmer of heat, faint echoes of engines began to thread the air. Jeremy adjusted his grip on the boy, tightening the gauze with practiced care. Lucky lifted his head ears, catching the distant wail. His body tensed, then steadied, knowing what was coming. The cry of sirens grew louder, weaving through the trees until red and white lights pulsed at the edge of the clearing. Gravel snapped under heavy tires, and the ambulance slowed to a halt in the small trailhead lot. Jeremy stepped forward, the boy pressed to his chest. Lucky moved at his side, his body low, every muscle alert. The shepherd's eyes never left the tree line, as if danger could still slip between the shadows. The back doors of the ambulance swung open. Two figures emerged with practiced speed. The first was Kelly Saunders, tall and wiry, her red hair tied tight at the nape of her neck. Her freckles stood out against skin flushed from the heat. Yet her voice was clear and controlled. "Male child?" she asked as she strode closer. "Approximate age 6, Jeremy replied. Shoulder wound, blood loss, slowed, pulse weak. Behind her came James Holloway, broader, older, his beard streaked with gray. His movements carried the calm of long experience, each step deliberate. He unfolded the stretcher with the ease of someone who had done so 1,000 times. Kelly knelt instantly, her hands already gloved. She touched the boy's wrist, eyes flicking to her watch. Rapid pulse. Pressures low. Her tone held no panic, only sharp focus. She slid a kit open, preparing an IV line. Jeremy eased the boy onto the stretcher, keeping one hand pressed to the gauze at his shoulder. Calvin whimpered faintly at the shift, his fingers curling in the air until Lucky stepped close. The shepherd lowered his head, pressing his nose near the boy's knee. Calvin's hand found fur-weak grip, tightening, as if he had no strength left for anything else. Lucky's amber eyes stayed locked on Kelly, then James, his stance watchful. His tail lay low, ears forward, every line of his body announcing, "I am here." Jeremy placed a steadying palm on the dog's neck. James moved beside Kelly, applying a pressure dressing, securing it tight. His voice was calm, steady. "Bleed is controlled. Airway clear. We can move." Kelly slipped the IV needle with practiced hands, taping it in place. She spoke into her radio, listing vitals, every number clipped and precise. Jeremy listened, though his eyes never left the boy's pale face. The boy stirred once, lids half lifting. His whisper barely rose above the cicadas. "Dog stays." Jeremy leaned closer, voice low. "He's here. He's not leaving you." Lucky whined softly, a note so quiet it carried more comfort than words. His muzzle brushed the edge of the stretcher until the boy's fingers stilled. Kelly looked up, her eyes meeting Jeremy's. "We need him in the unit now. Can you ride behind?" Jeremy nodded. "Yes." "But the dog," James gave a brief shake of his head. "Protocol's clear. He follows in another vehicle." Jeremy's jaw tightened. He looked down at Lucky, who stood steady, gaze fixed on Calvin. The shepherd did not move until Jeremy gave a signal. Kelly and James lifted the stretcher, guiding it smoothly into the ambulance. Calvin's grip slipped from Lucky's fur, his hand falling to his chest. His eyes closed again, but his lips curved faintly, as though trust had taken root in that brief touch. The doors shut, sealing the boy in with the smell of antiseptic and the rush of machines. The sirens wailed once more, and the ambulance pulled forward, dust rising in its wake. Jeremy stepped aside. Lucky pressed against his leg. The shepherd's eyes tracked the flashing lights until they vanished down the road. "Sacred Heart," Jeremy murmured. "That's where they'll take him." Lucky's ears twitched, his gaze still on the distance. His body was taut, ready, unwilling to let the boy out of sight. Jeremy laid a hand against the dog's shoulder, steady. "We'll meet him there." The path had shifted again. What began by the river now carried them into the sterile halls of a hospital where the fight for survival would continue. The ambulance reached Spokane's Sacred Heart Medical Center within minutes. Jeremy's patrol car pulled in behind Lucky, seated upright in the back, eyes locked forward as if memorizing the red lights ahead. The hospital doors slid open, exhaling a rush of cold air. Doctors and nurses were already waiting, moving as one toward the stretcher. Jeremy followed close, Lucky at his heel. The shepherd's nails clicked against the tile, his body tight with the urge to stay close to the boy. Dr. Anna Patel stepped forward, her dark eyes sharp behind the strands of hair tucked into a bun. She guided the stretcher into the trauma bay, her voice calm but quick. "Vitals." A nurse rattled off numbers while Anna examined the shoulder wound. "Surface tear," she concluded after palpating gently. "Likely glass or a blade. No vascular compromise. He'll recover." Her tone steadied the room, her certainty pulling order from chaos. Jeremy stood at the threshold, one hand on Lucky's collar. The German shepherd pressed forward, but Jeremy held him back. Hospital rules allowed no K9 beyond certain points. Lucky lowered his head, chest rising with a low whine that carried both worry and refusal. Jeremy crouched beside him. "Stay here. He needs you close, even from out here." Lucky settled reluctantly, lying against the doorframe, his amber eyes fixed on the small form inside. Through the glass panel, Jeremy watched Calvin. The boy lay dwarfed by crisp sheets, electrodes pasted to his chest. His lips moved faintly, and his eyelids fluttered open. His gaze roamed past the doctors until it reached the door. Jeremy leaned forward, understanding before the words formed. "He's looking for you," he whispered to Lucky. The shepherd lifted his head higher, ears pricked, body still. The boy's eyes locked onto the familiar shape beyond the glass. His fingers twitched once, as though trying to reach across the distance. Only then did his lids sink again, his breathing evening out under the steady rhythm of machines. Anna looked toward Jeremy briefly. He's stable enough for sutures. We'll close the wound now. Jeremy gave a short nod. The doctors pulled the curtains, shielding the boy as their hands worked. Jeremy remained planted at the threshold, Lucky pressed against his leg. The minutes stretched long, punctuated only by the hum of vents and the muted beeping of monitors. At last the curtain parted. Anna removed her gloves, her expression firm. He'll be sore, but he's out of immediate danger. Trauma suggests more than an accident. This was not a simple fall. Her eyes met Jeremy's. The weight of the truth hung between them. Jeremy's jaw tightened. He looked down at Lucky. The shepherd's gaze had not left the boy once. When the room quieted, Jeremy stepped closer, hand pressed lightly to the glass. Calvin stirred again, eyes half opening. His lips shaped no words yet. His gaze drifted toward the doorway where Lucky sat. Jeremy murmured low and sure, "He's here. He'll be here when you wake." The boy's lids lowered once more, surrendering to rest. His chest rose in steady rhythm, fragile but real. Jeremy exhaled, steadying his own pulse. The fight was far from over. The wound was closed, but the story behind it had only begun. Lucky shifted tail brushing the floor, once gaze never softening. The shepherd had taken his post outside the door like a sentry carved from stone. Jeremy straightened, shoulders heavy yet anchored. The next step would bring answers, and with them, the storm of truth. The door at the end of the corridor opened, and a woman in a tailored blazer entered with a leather folio under her arm. Her stride was precise, her gaze sharp. Child Protective Services. Laura Chen had arrived. Laura Chen paused outside the room, flipping open her folio. Her pen rested between her fingers, poised like a blade honed by years of practice. Jeremy recognized her type. Sharp, relentless, yet carrying the weight of too many children she could not save. She gave a brief nod to him, then her gaze settled on Lucky lying firm across the doorway. "That's the boy's anchor," Jeremy said quietly. Laura studied the shepherd, then returned a short nod. "Then let's use that." She pushed open the door. Calvin lay propped against pillows, shoulder wrapped in fresh gauze. The monitors hummed softly beside him, steady rhythm against the quiet. His eyes opened when Laura entered, wary but alert, drifting quickly back toward the doorway, where Lucky sat. Laura set a small bundle on the tray table. Pencils. A stack of blank paper. She pulled a chair close, lowering herself until her eyes were level with his. Her voice was calm, deliberate. "Calvin, sometimes it's easier to show what happened than to say it. You can draw anything you want. No rush." Calvin's small hand hesitated before reaching. His fingers brushed the green pencil first, then shifted to black. He pressed the point hard against the page, dragging uneven lines. His strokes were rough, jagged, breaking across the paper as though the effort itself hurt. Jeremy stood at the corner of the room, arms crossed, eyes steady. Lucky inched forward, nose near the threshold, ears pricked. The first figure on the page took shape. Tall, stick-like hand raised. In that hand, a bottle. Harsh lines sliced across the bottle's neck, slanted like anger. Beside it, another line curved into a belt mid-swing. At the bottom, letters scratched in uneven script. K-R-I-S. Jeremy's chest went tight. He stepped closer to see clearly, the heat of anger rising like fire beneath his skin. Lucky's body shifted as if sensing it, a low breath leaving his throat not threat, but echo. Laura's eyes narrowed. She slid a plastic sleeve from her folio, lifting the page with care, sealing it inside. She signed her initials, across the edge, voice even. "This will be preserved as evidence." Calvin's grip on the pencil trembled. He dropped it, his hand falling limp against the blanket. His eyes darted once toward the door, seeking the shepherd. Lucky lowered his head, pressing close to the frame, until his amber gaze met the boy's. The air between them carried something unspoken. Safety promise and the kind of bond built in silence. Calvin's breathing eased, though faint lines of fear still shadowed his face. Jeremy swallowed, his jaw tight. He had seen plenty of bruises in his career, but it was the boy's drawing that hollowed him out. A child's truth rarely missed its mark. Laura wrote notes in quick strokes, her face composed. She glanced up at Jeremy. "We'll need to speak with his mother. Soon." Jeremy said nothing. His gaze stayed on the boy, then slid to Lucky, who had not moved from his guard. Inside Jeremy, quiet anger hardened into resolve. This was not only about treating wounds. This was about stopping the source. Calvin closed his eyes again, hands still resting against the edge of the tray, fingertips brushing the page through plastic. His lips parted in a whisper too soft for most ears, but Jeremy caught it. "Dog stays." Jeremy lowered his head closer. "He stays." Lucky's tail swept once across the floor, silent reassurance. Outside the door, footsteps sounded. A woman's voice carried faintly down the hall, uncertain, fragile. Laura looked toward the sound pen, pausing. "She's here," Laura murmured. "The mother." Jeremy shifted shoulders, squaring. Lucky lifted his head, ears high. The next storm was walking their way. The footsteps slowed outside the door. A nurse guided a woman forward, her hand hovering near her elbow, as though expecting her to stumble. Nora Brooks entered the room. She was in her early 30s, yet her frame carried the slump of someone older, shoulders rounded, as if pressing against invisible weight. Her blouse was wrinkled hair, hastily brushed strands falling limp around her pale face. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her lips trembled even when still. Her gaze went first to the bed, to the boy lying small under the sheets. Her breath-hitched chest rising quick before words could form. "Calvin?" The name broke from her like a confession. Calvin stirred faintly, lids fluttering but not opening. His fingers twitched near the edge of the blanket, brushing fabric as if searching for Lucky's fur. The shepherd stood at the doorway, body angled toward Nora, tail still, eyes alert. He did not step forward, but his stance was clear: protector first, companion second. Laura Chen closed her folio with a deliberate snap. She rose from her chair, her voice cool but edged with steel. "Mrs. Brooks, I need clarity. Your son is under protective care. Evidence points to repeated harm. You knew something was happening." Nora's face crumpled. Her hands twisted together, fingers clenching the hem of her blouse. I couldn't." Laura stepped closer, tone unyielding. "You could have spoken." Neighbors filed reports. He came to school bruised, and still silence. Tears welled, spilling down Nora's cheeks. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He said if I spoke, he'd hurt Calvin worse. He said he'd—" Her words dissolved, throat tight with fear. Jeremy stood near the wall, arms folded across his chest. His eyes tracked every flicker of Nora's face, every tremor in her hands. He saw fear, yes, but also something else. A hesitation that lived in her eyes, torn between shame and the faint spark of wanting to protect. Lucky shifted slightly, ears twitching, eyes sliding between Nora and the boy. The shepherd's instincts read the room faster than words could. His gaze lingered on her amber eyes, narrowing as if he measured truth not by speech, but by scent and posture. Laura's tone softened only a fraction. "Fear is real, Mrs. Brooks, but silence fed his violence. Calvin needs protection, and protection begins with truth." Nora's knees bent, her body folding into the chair by the bed. She leaned forward, reaching as if to touch her son's arm, but stopped short when Calvin stirred, murmuring faintly in his sleep. His lips formed no words, but his hand pressed against the mattress edge, angled toward the doorway where Lucky lay. Nora's breath broke. Her hand fell back into her lap. She stared at the shepherd, then at Jeremy. Shame deepened in her eyes. Jeremy finally spoke, his voice low but firm. Your son trusted a dog before he trusted you. That should tell you something. Nora flinched as though struck. She dropped her gaze to the floor, her tears falling unchecked. Laura opened her folio again, pen poised. You'll sign a safety plan. You'll cut all contact with Chris. Counseling, housing, full compliance. Or custody moves elsewhere. Nora's lips trembled, but she nodded, whispering, I'll do whatever it takes. Silence pressed into the room. Jeremy's storm-gray eyes remained on her, searching, doubtful, yet watching for the spark of sincerity. Lucky remained steady, chest rising, slow eyes fixed on the mother who had failed her child, reading what words could not. Down the hall, the lights dimmed as night fell. The hospital shifted into its quieter rhythm, but unease lingered like a shadow that would not lift. Jeremy's gut tightened. The boy was safe for now, but storms had a way of finding their way back. And this storm had a name: Chris. Midnight draped the pediatric wing in muted light. Machines hummed a soft rhythm, nurses walked in quiet shoes, and the air smelled faintly of disinfectant. Jeremy sat in a plastic chair outside Calvin's room, his elbows on his knees. Lucky stretched at his feet, eyes half-lidded yet alert. The peace fractured with a shout. It came from the far corridor, loud, slurred, filled with rage. Jeremy shot to his feet. Lucky rose in the same motion, ears, sharp hackles bristling. Another shout followed, louder this time. He's my boy. You can't keep him from me. Jeremy strode toward the sound, Lucky pacing close, teeth bared in silent warning. At the glass doors leading into the ward, a man staggered against the frame. Tall, wiry, his hair slick with sweat. His denim jacket was stained jeans, torn boots, leaving mud on the polished floor. His fists pounded the glass, each blow rattling the frame. His face was flushed with drink eyes, wild with fury. Chris Riker. The young nurse at the station gasped, stumbling back. Her hand found the panic button under the counter. The alarm buzzed low, summoning staff. Jeremy's voice cut through the noise. Chris, step away from the door. Chris slammed his palm flat against the glass, spit streaking across it. You can't keep him from me. He's mine to raise, mine to keep. Not you. Not that mutt. His words broke into a manic laugh. Lucky lunged forward with a growl that vibrated down the hallway. Jeremy's grip tightened on the leash, steadying the shepherd, his voice low and sharp. Hold. But the energy in the hall shifted. Nurses clustered behind counters, eyes wide. One bolted for the phone, calling security. The glass shuddered again under Chris's fists. Boots echoed against tile. Sergeant Bonnie Reyes appeared at the far end of the corridor. Compact, strong, her uniform neat even at this late hour. Her dark hair framed a face carved from years of hard service. She moved with the certainty of someone who had confronted men like Chris before and walked away standing. Carter, she called, her tone clipped. You've got eyes on him. Jeremy's answer was firm. Drunk, violent, demanding the boy. Bonnie's gaze flicked to the glass, then back to Jeremy. Hold the line. I'll flank. She advanced steadily, one hand raised in warning, the other near her belt. Her voice cut sharp through the chaos. Chris Riker stepped back from the door. You are trespassing on medical property. You're endangering staff and patients. Chris pressed his forehead to the glass, snarling. He's mine. You can't steal him. His fists hammered once more, the sound like thunder through the wing. Lucky pulled forward again, growl deepening. Jeremy bent low, his command like iron. Steady. The shepherd froze, every muscle taut, ready if the moment demanded. Bonnie's voice rose cold and direct. You've crossed the line tonight, Riker. Assault, trespass, endangerment. Step back or we escalate. For a heartbeat, the hall held still. Only Chris's ragged breathing filled the silence. Then he staggered back, fists trembling, his laugh twisting into a snarl. His eyes darted from Bonnie to Jeremy to the dog, as if calculating which threat would strike first. Jeremy's gut coiled tight. He knew what was coming. Behind him, Lucky's amber eyes locked on the man beyond the glass. The shepherd stood as a wall, weighting every line of his body, saying what Jeremy already knew. If the door opened, the storm would break inside. The nurses huddled close together, tension drawn tight across the hall. Bonnie moved another step forward, her cuffs ready. Bonnie closed the last few steps, her boots striking tile in a rhythm that carried authority. Her hand shifted, cuffs glinting in the dim hospital light. Jeremy kept his stance angled toward the glass, one hand resting on Lucky's harness. The shepherd's body was rigid, weight, forward chest vibrating with a growl that never broke loose. Every ounce of him was a drawn bowstring waiting for a signal. Chris's laugh cracked into a shout. "You can't take him from me, he's mine." His palms slammed flat again, rattling the frame. Jeremy's voice cut low, steady. "Chris, stop. This ends here." The door hissed as Bonnie keyed the lock. In a single movement, she swung it open, stepping inside the threshold with calm precision. Jeremy moved with her, Lucky pacing tight at his heel, teeth bared just enough to remind the drunk man where the line stood. Chris staggered back a step, then threw his shoulders forward, fists clenched. His breath reeked of alcohol, his words slurred with fury. "You think I'm scared of you? You think I'm scared of that dog?" Lucky lunged half astride, the leash snapping taut in Jeremy's grip. The sound alone, the snap of leather, the low thunder from the shepherd's throat, froze Chris mid-step. His eyes darted wide, caught in amber fire that promised consequences. Bonnie's voice cracked like a whip. "Chris Riker, you're under arrest for assault, trespass, and child endangerment. Hands behind your head, now." For a moment, Chris swayed, his rage boiling against the wall of authority before him. Then he barked a laugh that ended in a cough. "He's still mine. You can't change that." Jeremy took a step closer. Lucky pressed against his leg. The shepherd's muscles rippled, his teeth flashing in the pale light. Chris's bravado wavered, his fists lowering as his gaze stayed locked on the dog. Bonnie moved in swift, practiced motion. Her cuffs snapped around his wrists with a metallic bite. The sound rang down the corridor, echoing against tile and glass. It was sharp, final, the sound of judgment. Chris jerked once, then sagged, muttering curses under his breath. Nurses peeked from behind counters, eyes wide, breaths releasing in shaky relief. Jeremy exhaled, his grip easing slightly on Lucky's harness. At ease, he whispered. Lucky shook out his coat tail, flicking once, but his gaze never left the restrained man. Bonnie tightened her hold on Chris's arm, guiding him toward the exit. "You've had your say," she said flatly. "Now the law speaks." Chris twisted, his voice cracking through clenched teeth. "You can lock me up, but he'll always remember me." His words spat venom, but Jeremy's eyes hardened. He glanced at Lucky, who stood steady, the boy's protector, long before Chris's threats could reach him again. As the double doors swallowed the struggling man, a hush fell over the corridor. Nurses exchanged looks of relief, one muffling a nervous laugh. The storm had broken, and for now, calm returned. Jeremy crouched, hand firm against Lucky's shoulder. "Good work, partner." The shepherd leaned into the touch, then settled back a sentinel once more. The quiet returned, but it was different now. Stronger, steadier. Calvin still slept a floor away, unaware of the clash outside his door. For him, safety had been bought by a circle of resolve, bound in steel cuffs and loyal eyes. Jeremy straightened, watching Bonnie lead Chris away. The echo of metal still rang in his ears. It was not the end, but it was a start. He turned back toward Calvin's room. The boy would wake again, and the journey to healing would need more than sirens and cuffs. It would need hope. And hope sometimes came in small shapes. Clay, stone, and the quiet word, home. Morning light spilled into the pediatric ward, soft and golden after the storm of the night. The blinds slanted thin beams across the linoleum floor, cutting shadows that looked less harsh than before. Calvin sat propped against pillows, his thin arms bandaged, his eyes wide, but clearer than the day before. At his bedside sat Meredith Sloan, the hospital's art therapist. She carried with her a shallow tray, small tubs of soft clay, and a clear bowl filled with smooth river stones. Her auburn hair, braided neatly over one shoulder, carried streaks of gray that seemed to add gravity to her steady presence. She set the tray down, her voice calm, warm. "Calvin," she said gently, "sometimes hands can speak when words are hard. Would you like to make something?" The boy's fingers hesitated, then brushed the edge of the clay. He pinched a piece, rolling it slowly, shaping it without plan. Meredith encouraged him with a nod. "It doesn't have to be perfect. Just let it take form." Jeremy stood against the wall, arms crossed, watching quietly. Lucky sprawled at the boy's feet, his body long, his chest rising in a steady rhythm. His tail brushed the floor, every so often a gentle sweep that matched the child's gaze. Piece by piece, Calvin pressed the clay into shape. Slanted walls emerged, uneven but strong. He smoothed a roof across the top, his small hands trembling slightly but steadying with each press. A doorway opened when he pushed his thumb through the front. Meredith leaned closer, her smile faint but proud. "That looks like a house." Calvin didn't answer, but his eyes flicked to Jeremy, then to Lucky, then back to the clay. Slowly, he reached into the bowl, selecting a small stone. It was smooth, rounded, cool against his palm. With care, he pressed it into the threshold of the house right in front of the door. He whispered a single word, soft as breath. "Home." Jeremy felt something shift in his chest. It wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic, but it carried weight. A boy who had known fear, who had whispered another man's name in terror, had spoken this word instead. Lucky's ears perked, tail swishing once, then twice. The shepherd lowered his head, resting his muzzle near the boy's knee. Calvin looked down, eyes brightening faintly, a small smile tugging at the edge of his lips. Meredith's eyes softened. She recorded a note on her clipboard, but her gaze stayed on the boy. "It's a strong house, Calvin. Who lives inside?" Calvin pressed a finger against the roof, then lifted his hand slowly, pointing toward Jeremy and Lucky. He said nothing more, but the meaning was clear. Jeremy cleared his throat, his voice low, steady. "That's a good house, and it's yours." Calvin's thin shoulders eased, as if the clay figure had given him permission to imagine safety. He leaned back against the pillows, still staring at the small house on the tray table. His eyelids lowered heavy, but not with fear, just with the exhaustion of healing. Lucky remained at his side, tail brushing softly, a silent promise wrapped in fur and presence. Meredith gathered her things with care, leaving the clay house and the stone where Calvin had placed them. "We'll keep this here," she said, "so you can see it when you wake." Jeremy watched the boy drift towards sleep, his lips curving once more around the word. Home. The silence that followed was not heavy, but full of quiet space where trust had begun to take root. But beyond these walls, the next step waited. Courtrooms did not measure clay houses or whispered words. They measured evidence reports and testimonies. The courthouse carried a different kind of weight than the hospital. Its stone walls and tall windows spoke of order and judgment, of decisions that could redraw the course of lives. Jeremy walked the hallway with steady steps, Lucky at his heel. The shepherd drew curious glances from clerks and guards alike, but no one stopped him. Exceptions had been granted. Calvin's case was no ordinary matter. Inside, the family courtroom felt smaller than Jeremy expected, less intimidating in size, but heavier in silence. Wooden benches lined the space, the air filled with the smell of polished oak and faint coffee. At the bench sat Judge Elaine Porter, her silver hair pulled into a precise bun, her black robe crisp. She adjusted her glasses, eyes sweeping the room with a balance of patience and gravity. At the front table, Laura Chen laid out evidence with meticulous care. She placed Calvin's drawing in its sealed sleeve, the child's uneven letters, KRIS, etched across the page. Next came the medical reports, contusions, sunburn, and the wound stitched by Dr. Patel. The photographs of bruises paired with the physician's statement carried weight that words alone could not. Jeremy was called to stand. His testimony was clear-clipped, the trail of blood, the footprints, the boy's whispered fear. He kept his voice steady, though his gut tightened at every detail. Lucky sat beside him silent, yet commanding his amber eyes, watching the room as if he too understood the gravity of testimony. Nora sat at the opposing table, shoulders hunched, hands twisting in her lap. She looked smaller than she had in the hospital, her hair brushed but flat, her face pale under the courtroom lights. When asked to speak, her voice wavered. I knew he was hurting Calvin, but I was scared. I thought if I stayed quiet, it would protect him. I was wrong. Tears streaked her cheeks. She wiped them with the back of her hand, whispering, I failed my son. Judge Porter regarded her for a long moment, expression unreadable. Mrs. Brooks, fear does not absolve responsibility. You had a duty to act. The court must weigh not only your remorse, but your capacity to change. Nora nodded quickly, words tumbling out. I'll do the counseling. I'll cut contact with Chris. I'll do anything if it means I can be his mother again. The guardian ad litem, Martin Kellogg, rose next. His voice carried calm authority. Calvin shows clear attachment to Officer Carter and his K-9 partner. He exhibits fear when Chris is mentioned. Stability is crucial. I recommend temporary placement with kin. His mother's cousin, Lydia Brooks, has already opened her home. Mrs. Brooks should have only supervised visitation until she demonstrates consistent progress. The courtroom stilled as Judge Porter leaned back, tapping her pen against the bench. At last she spoke. This court declares Calvin Brooks a dependent child of the state. Temporary placement will be with Lydia Brooks. Mrs. Brooks, you are granted supervised visitation, only contingent upon your compliance with counseling and housing stability. The gavel struck once, the sound crisp and final. Nora crumpled into quiet sobs, her head bowed, her hands clutching at tissues she barely managed to hold. The decision was not a door slammed shut, but it was not freedom either. It was a narrow bridge she would need to cross, with proof, not promises. Jeremy glanced at her from across the room, his chest tightened with conflict. Pity for the broken woman, anger for the silence that had left Calvin bruised and afraid. Beside him, Lucky shifted ears, twitching tail, brushing the floor once, as if sensing his partner's unrest. The courtroom emptied slowly, the air heavy with words left unsaid. Jeremy remained still, eyes fixed on Nora as she was led out. He saw both weakness and yearning in her, a mix that could heal or destroy. Nora sat alone on the wooden bench outside the courtroom, shoulders slumped, fingers twisting a damp tissue into tighter knots. Her eyes were red mascara streaking faintly down her cheeks. People passed her without pause. Clerks, lawyers, families with their own burdens. Yet she seemed invisible, folded into herself like someone already accustomed to being overlooked. Jeremy lingered nearby, Lucky resting at his side. The shepherd's ears twitched at each step in the hallway, but his gaze often flicked back to the woman across the bench. Laura Chen spoke briefly with the guardian ad litem, then left her heels echoing away. For a few moments, silence settled, broken only by the hum of fluorescent lights. Jeremy studied Nora, his jaw tight. She whispered to no one, words spilling under her breath. I should have stopped him. I should have done more. But every time I tried, he... Her voice trailed, swallowed by fear that seemed to linger even without Chris present. Jeremy's chest pulled taut. He had seen this before. Women bent by violence, caught between love, dependence, and terror. Some broke free. Others clung to excuses until it was too late. Nora looked up suddenly, her eyes wet, voice cracking. I'm his mother. He's all I had left, and I failed him. Jeremy didn't move. His face remained steady, though his thoughts burned. You didn't just fail him. You let silence bruise him. Lucky's shifted tail brushing once against the floor. The shepherd seemed to sense Jeremy's anger, his presence grounding him. Jeremy crouched briefly, hand brushing Lucky's neck. His partner leaned into the touch, steady as stone. Nora dabbed at her eyes, words tumbling fast now. Chris said he'd kill me if I spoke. He said he'd take Calvin away. I believed him, and I froze. Every night I told myself tomorrow I'd leave. Tomorrow I'd pack a bag. But tomorrow never came. Her honesty carried weight, but it did not erase the truth. Fear explained her silence, yet it did not heal the scars on her son's arms. Jeremy finally spoke, his tone low even. Fear doesn't excuse what Calvin endured. It only gave Chris more room. Nora flinched, her eyes dropping again. I know, and I hate myself for it. She sat straighter, gripping the tissue so tight it tore. I want to change. I'll do counseling. I'll follow every rule. I'll prove it. I don't care how long it takes. Jeremy studied her face, searching. He saw desperation, but also fragility, like glass that might shatter under the smallest pressure. Part of him wanted to believe her. Another part carried the image of Calvin whispering dog stays while refusing to reach for his mother's hand. Lucky exhaled, lowering his head to his paws. Amber eyes drifted toward Jeremy, as if reminding him, judgment belonged to the court, but trust would belong to Calvin. Nora's sobs softened into silence. She sat still, her shoulders trembling faintly, lips moving as if praying. Jeremy turned away, the conflict heavy in his chest. He pitied her weakness, but anger simmered all the same. The hallway emptied, further quiet, settling in like dust. Jeremy adjusted his cap, gave Lucky a gentle pat, and walked toward the exit. Behind him, Nora remained hunched on the bench, a figure caught between regret and fragile resolve. Outside, the evening light slanted across Spokane, painting long shadows against the courthouse steps. Jeremy inhaled the cooling air, but the storm had not passed. Chris might have been in custody, yet his presence lingered like a shadow over every breath Calvin took. Chris sat in a county cell awaiting his criminal trial, but his absence did not erase him. His shadow clung like smoke, seeping into the quiet corners where Calvin slept. At night, in the small hospital room, still reserved for him during recovery, Calvin tossed in his sheets. His breaths came quick, sharp. Sweat dampened his temples. His lips moved with broken whispers. No. Don't. Please. Jeremy stirred from the chair near the wall, eyes snapping open. He leaned forward as Calvin whimpered, his arms clenching the blanket tight. Lucky rose at once, climbing onto his paws with a soft thump. The shepherd padded to the bedside, his amber eyes glowing faintly in the low light. He lowered his head, pressing his muzzle against Calvin's arm. The boy jolted awake with a cry, his thin frame trembling. His eyes darted wide, glassy with terror, until they locked on the shepherd. Lucky. His voice cracked small and raw. Jeremy was already at his side, steady hands on the boy's shoulder. You're safe. He can't reach you here. But Calvin clung to the dog fingers, burying into the thick fur at Lucky's neck. His breathing slowed only when the shepherd curled close, his chest rising in a calm rhythm for the boy to follow. Jeremy sat back, heart heavy. He knew the battle was no longer only about physical wounds. The boy's spirit had been scarred, and scars of that kind did not heal with stitches. Through the long hours, Lucky remained at the boy's side. When Calvin stirred, the dog shifted closer. When he whimpered, the shepherd pressed his flank against him. By dawn, the boy slept again. His face softer now, lips parted in even breaths. Jeremy rose, stretching the fatigue from his shoulders. He glanced at Lucky, who lifted his head without moving from the boy's side. "You're his shield," Jeremy murmured. Lucky blinked once, slow and sure, as if to answer, "Yes, and I will remain so." Later that morning, Laura Chen stopped by with fresh paperwork. She studied the sleeping boy and the dog curled at his side. "The trial for Chris will move forward in Superior Court. Assault, endangerment, trespass. He'll sit for a while." Jeremy's voice was low. "Prison bars don't erase shadows." Laura nodded, her eyes softening as she watched Calvin's hand still tangled in Lucky's fur. "No. But shadows fade when children find light again. That's why placement matters." That afternoon, when Calvin woke, Jeremy sat near his bed. "You'll be moving soon," he told him gently. "Your Aunt Lydia will take you home with her. It'll be safe. You'll have a room, a bed, and people who care." Calvin blinked, uncertain. His lips pressed together, silent, until his gaze shifted to Lucky. "Will he come?" Jeremy hesitated, then stroked the boy's arm. "He'll visit, and he'll always be near when you need him." Lucky wagged his tail once, leaning forward to lick the boy's hand. Calvin let out a small sound, not quite a laugh, but close enough to stir warmth in the room. That night, when the lights dimmed again, Calvin slept more soundly. He still stirred, still muttered faint fears, but each time Lucky's presence steadied him. The shepherd was more than a dog now. He was the line between past and future, shadow and light. And soon Calvin would take his first step into that future, into the care of family waiting to give him more than safety, waiting perhaps to give him back his childhood. Lydia Brooks's home sat on the quieter side of Spokane, a modest house with a wide porch and a backyard edged by tall firs. When Calvin first arrived, he stood stiff on the steps, his small backpack clutched to his chest. Lydia crouched to meet his eyes, her hands steady, though her voice held a softness that carried weight. "You've got a room here, Calvin? With your own bed? No one will take that away." He nodded faintly but said nothing. His eyes slid past her to the yard where wind chimes swayed with the afternoon breeze. Jeremy stood nearby, Lucky at his heel. The shepherd's tail gave one low wag, steady reassurance. Inside, Lydia's house smelled of baked bread and cedar polish. The living room was warm, filled with books, family photos, and the kind of clutter that spoke of use, not neglect. Lydia showed him his room, a small bed, neatly made shelves lined with a few toys already waiting. A quilt patched in different colors lay across the mattress. "This was mine when I was your age," Lydia explained, smoothing the fabric. "I thought it might help." Calvin placed his backpack on the floor, still silent. His hand brushed the quilt briefly, then dropped away. The days that followed unfolded slowly, like cautious steps across uncertain ground. Lydia cooked meals and left the door to his room ajar at night. She spoke gently, never pressing him to answer. At first, Calvin responded with nods or shrugs, eyes darting to the door as though expecting it to slam. But Lucky's visits changed the rhythm. Each time Jeremy brought the shepherd, Calvin's face brightened. The boy knelt in the grass, fingers threading through the dog's thick coat, his laughter breaking free in small bursts. For those moments, the shadow of fear lifted, replaced by the sound of a child rediscovering joy. One afternoon, Lydia watched from the porch as Calvin threw a ball across the yard. Lucky bounded after it, returning with a proud trot. Calvin laughed, the sound light and unguarded. Lydia's eyes filled with quiet relief. She leaned against the railing, whispering to Jeremy. "It's the first time I've heard him laugh like that." Jeremy's gaze softened, though he said little. Lucky sat at Calvin's side, tail brushing grass, his presence anchoring every moment. Still, trust did not come easily. When neighbors stopped by, Calvin, tensed, shrinking behind Lydia, or pressing himself against Lucky's side. His smile faded, his eyes wary. Strangers, even kind ones, were reminders of the world outside, a world that had hurt him before. Lydia never pushed. She simply offered patience, letting Calvin choose his pace. Slowly, he began to linger longer at the dinner table, to hum softly as he colored to meet her eyes without flinching. Each step was small, but together they marked progress. One evening, Calvin sat cross-legged on the porch, the clay house Meredith had given him, resting on the step beside him. He placed the stone at its doorway again, just as he had in the hospital. His voice was faint but sure when he whispered, "Home." Lydia, standing behind him, blinked back tears. Jeremy heard the word too, and though he kept his expression steady, a weight lifted from his chest. Lucky pressed close, tail wagging once, as if sealing the boy's claim. But healing was not a straight path. Shadows lingered. At night, Calvin sometimes stirred from sleep, calling softly for the shepherd. And while Jeremy and Lucky came often, their visits were not constant. The boy's heart held both hope and wariness, as if balancing on a fragile bridge between past and future. The court required the next step, soon a supervised visit between Calvin and Nora. The river had been chosen as the place. Open, calm, less heavy than the courthouse. Jeremy knew the air would be thick with tension. Yet he also knew that where words failed, Lucky's presence had a way of breaking walls. The Spokane River shimmered in late afternoon light, its surface broken by the occasional ripple of fish and the arc of skipping stones. The court had chosen this bend for Calvin's supervised visit with his mother. Open air, soft wind, no walls to tighten the moment. Calvin sat on the grass, cross-legged, shoes scuffed, a small backpack beside him. He hugged his knees, watching the river, as though measuring its current. Lydia stood back near the parking lot, giving space, but staying close enough to watch. Jeremy remained steady nearby, arms crossed loosely, eyes scanning the scene with quiet vigilance. At his side, Lucky stood, tall, ears twitching with every sound. The shepherd's presence made the space feel anchored, less fragile. Laura Chen arrived with Nora, her steps measured, clipboard tucked under one arm. Nora walked with hesitation, her frame thinner than weeks before her blouse, simple hair tied back in a loose braid. Her eyes carried both longing and shame, the kind that kept her gaze low until she reached the grass. Calvin's body tensed the moment he saw her. He didn't run, didn't speak, only pressed his chin tighter against his knees. Nora stopped a few paces away, her breath catching. "Hi, Calvin." Her voice cracked on his name, thin as the wind. The boy didn't answer. His fingers tightened against his jeans. His eyes flicked once toward Lucky, then back to the ground. Jeremy's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. He let the silence stretch, knowing it was not his to break. Laura stepped forward, her tone calm but firm. "This is a supervised visit. You'll speak with him here. No contact unless he initiates it." Nora nodded quickly, her hands twisting together. She lowered herself to the grass, keeping her distance. I missed you," she whispered. Calvin's lips pressed thin. For a long moment, the only sounds were the rustle of willow leaves and the low drone of the river. Lucky shifted, then stepping closer to Calvin. He sat at the boy's side, pressing his flank against the small shoulder. His tail brushed grass in a slow rhythm. Calvin reached for him instinctively, his fingers burying into fur. His breathing eased, and for the first time he glanced at his mother. Nora's eyes filled instantly with tears. "I'm sorry," she said, voice shaking. "I should have protected you. I should have—" Her words cut short as Laura raised a hand. "Keep it simple. Let him lead." Nora swallowed hard, nodding. She tried again, softer this time. "You look stronger." Calvin blinked at her, his lips parting as though to answer, but no sound came. Instead, he pressed closer to Lucky, whispering, "Stay." The shepherd wagged his tail once, leaning his head into the boy's lap. The tension broke, slightly softened by the simple exchange. Jeremy watched closely. He saw Nora's hands tremble in her lap, saw the boy's guarded posture. Yet he also saw the faintest shift, the barrier easing a fraction. Minutes passed in quiet. Nora began to speak of small things. The river, the way she used to skip stones, how Calvin once laughed when she missed. Her voice steadied as she stayed with memories instead of apologies. Calvin listened. He didn't smile, not yet, but his shoulders loosened. He glanced at her once a flicker, then returned to tracing circles in Lucky's fur. The visit ended with no dramatic embrace, no forgiveness spoken. But when Laura called time, Calvin did not shrink away. He stood slowly, brushing grass from his knees, and slung his backpack onto his shoulder. Before leaving, he looked once more at his mother. His gaze was cautious, but not as closed as when she arrived. Lucky rose beside him, tail swishing low. The shepherd's steady presence had bridged a silence words could not. The second supervised visit took place in a small room at the community center near the river. The walls were painted soft yellow, the furniture plain but clean. A box of crayons and paper had been set on the table, a simple bridge for children who found words too heavy. Calvin sat at the table, his legs swinging just above the floor. Lucky lay stretched out beside him, paws forward, head resting on the cool tile. His amber eyes tracked every movement in the room without ever looking restless. Jeremy stood by the wall, arms folded steady as stone. Laura Chen positioned herself nearby, clipboard ready. Her expression sharp but calm. Nora entered quietly, her steps hesitant. She wore a pale sweater, her hair brushed smoother than the last time, though the strain around her eyes remained. She gave a small nod toward Jeremy, then lowered herself into the chair opposite Calvin. The boy's eyes didn't rise immediately. Instead, he reached for a crayon, dragging it across the page with careful strokes. Blue for the river, green for the trees, brown for the ground beneath them. His hands moved slowly, but with intent, as though the picture already lived in his mind. Nora watched, hands clasped together, lips pressed thin. She dared not interrupt. Bit by bit, the drawing formed. A small house with a wide porch, its door open to the river. Beside it, 3 figures stood, one taller, one smaller, and a dog with pointed ears. Calvin pressed the final lines into place, then picked up a gray crayon, scribbling a stone at the front step. When he finished, he stared at it for a long moment, then slid the paper across the table. His voice was quiet but steady. "For you." Nora's hands trembled as she lifted the page. Her eyes blurred at once. The house, the river, the 3 figures. It was simple, uneven, childlike, but it carried more weight than any sentence spoken. Her shoulders shook, and tears rolled freely down her cheeks. She pressed the drawing to her chest, but she did not reach for the boy. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Thank you." Calvin finally looked up. His expression was still cautious, but softer than before. His eyes drifted to Lucky, who wagged his tail once, thumping it against the floor. The boy allowed the faintest smile, as though the shepherd's quiet approval gave him strength. Nora wiped her face with shaking hands. "I promise," she said, her words trembling but firm. "I'll do better. I'll prove it. I'll make a place safe enough for you." She didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't beg for a hug. She only gave the promise she could offer. Laura observed closely, pen-scratching notes. Jeremy's jaw remained set, though a flicker of something passed in his eyes. Relief, perhaps, or guarded hope. He had seen too many promises dissolve under fear. Yet the picture in Nora's hands, drawn by Calvin's own intent, made this moment different. The visit ended quietly. Laura announced the time, her tone professional, but not harsh. Calvin gathered his crayons, slipping one small pebble from his pocket and placing it on the corner of the drawing before Nora folded it carefully. A simple gesture, but one that echoed the clay house at the hospital, a stone at the threshold, a marker of home. Nora stood clutching the paper as if it were fragile glass. She glanced at her son one last time, eyes full, but said nothing more. Instead, she gave a single nod, a promise carried in silence, and followed Laura out. Calvin leaned into Lucky fingers combing through the shepherd's fur. Jeremy crouched beside them, murmuring low, "You did well, buddy." The boy didn't answer, but he held tight to the dog. For now, that was enough. The next step would no longer be crayons and paper. It would be the courtroom again, where the law would decide futures, where Chris's shadow would finally be measured against justice. The Superior Court of Spokane carried a solemn air the morning of the final hearing. Its high windows let in slanted light that spilled across the polished wood floors, highlighting the hush of expectation. Jeremy sat near the back with Lucky at his feet. The shepherd was calm, but alert, his eyes scanning every movement, his body angled toward the center of the room, as though he too waited for judgment. At the front, Judge Porter presided with her usual poise. Her silver hair glinted in the light, her robe draped crisp and heavy. She tapped her pen once against the bench before beginning. This case regards the placement and welfare of Calvin Brooks. Laura Chen presented the evidence with precision. She laid Calvin's drawing before the court, now sealed in its protective sleeve. The child expressed fear of Chris Riker, represented here with a bottle and belt. His disclosure is consistent with medical reports and observations by staff. The placement with his Aunt Lydia has shown marked improvement in stability. However, reunification with the mother will depend on sustained compliance. The guardian ad litem, Martin Kellogg, stood next. The boy has begun to recover. He responds positively to Officer Carter and the K-9 and has shown trust with his aunt. He is not ready for unsupervised contact with his mother. I recommend Calvin remain with Lydia until Mrs. Brooks proves she can provide a safe environment. Nora sat quietly at the table, her hands folded, knuckles white. When the judge called on her, her voice trembled but did not break. "I failed him once. I can't change that. But I've started counseling and I will keep going. I'll do whatever it takes to be the mother he deserves." She glanced down, tears streaking her cheeks. "I ask only for the chance to prove myself." The courtroom turned next to the criminal matter. Chris Riker, in chains and an orange jumpsuit, stood with his attorney. His face was pale jaw, set in defiance, but his eyes flickered when the charges were read: child endangerment, assault, trespass. The testimony from Jeremy, the medical records, and Calvin's own drawing had closed every gap. The prosecutor's voice was firm. "We request a custodial sentence appropriate to the severity of repeated harm." The judge's gavel struck once, echoing through the chamber. "Chris Riker, you are sentenced to prison. Time served will not erase the years you sought to steal from a child. The law now speaks where you sought silence." Gasps rippled quietly from the gallery. Nora buried her face in her hands. Calvin was not present, but Jeremy felt the boy's shadow linger in every word. Justice at last had taken form. Judge Porter turned back to the custody matter. Calvin Brooks will remain in the temporary care of his Aunt Lydia Brooks. Mrs. Nora Brooks is permitted supervised visitation, only contingent upon continued counseling, safe housing, and strict compliance. This court will review progress at a later date. The gavel fell again, final and unyielding. Relief swept the room like a cool wind. Jeremy let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Lucky's tail brushed the floor, once a quiet signal of calm. As the courtroom emptied, Jeremy placed a hand on the shepherd's back. "It's not the end," he murmured, "but it's a start." Outside, sunlight washed the courthouse steps. The weight of months seemed to ease, replaced by something steadier, the first glimpse of safety, the first crack of light after a long storm. For Calvin, justice had spoken. For Jeremy, the mission was not only about courts and sentences. It was about giving the boy space to laugh again. The Spokane River carried a softer song that afternoon. Its surface glimmered gold beneath the late sun, each ripple breaking light into scattered diamonds. The air was warm, but not heavy-touched by the cool breath of water drifting off the current. Calvin crouched near the bank, shoes dug into damp soil, a flat stone cradled in his hand. His tongue peeked out in concentration as he flicked his wrist and sent the stone flying. It skipped once, twice, 3 times before sinking with a quiet plunk. He broke into laughter, the sound bright and unguarded. The echoes mingled with the murmur of the river, rising into something freer than anything Jeremy had heard from the boy before. Lydia stood farther back, talking with Laura Chen in low tones, giving Calvin room to breathe. This time there were no court walls, no sterile hospital lights, only open sky and the wide, patient river. Lucky lay stretched at Calvin's side, paws resting on the grass, his chest moving slow and steady. His ears twitched at the splash of each stone, but his eyes never left the boy. When Calvin laughed, the shepherd's tail brushed the ground in easy rhythm, as though laughter itself was something he had guarded all along. Jeremy leaned against a nearby tree, arms folded, eyes following both boy and dog. His shoulders loosened in a way they hadn't for months. He let the sound of the river and the boy's laughter wash over him, a reminder that healing didn't always come from verdicts or sentences. Sometimes it came from simple moments like this: stones skipping water, a dog's silent watch, a child remembering joy. Calvin picked another stone, testing its weight. He glanced at Lucky, grinning. Bet I can beat that one. Lucky tilted his head, ears perked, as if he truly understood the challenge. Calvin giggled, launched the stone, and watched it skip twice before vanishing. See? Better Jeremy chuckled quietly, shaking his head. Careful, Lucky. He might just outdo you. The boy turned, eyes sparkling. Lucky's the best. He always wins. Then, without hesitation, Calvin leaned down, pressing his cheek briefly against the shepherd's head. Lucky responded with a soft huff of air, leaning into the touch. The moment was small, but Jeremy felt it strike deep. This was no longer a boy haunted only by shadows. Piece by piece, Calvin was reclaiming what had been taken from him. And Lucky, steadfast as stone, had become the bridge carrying him there. As the sun tilted lower, the river glowed with honey light. Calvin threw his last stone, watching it skip wide before sinking. He clapped once, a grin splitting his face. Then he flopped onto the grass beside Lucky, chest heaving with laughter that finally gave way to quiet contentment. Jeremy stepped closer, crouching near them. Not bad, kid. You've got an arm? Calvin smiled up at him, hair-mussed cheeks flushed with life. I like it here. The river feels safe. His hand slid into Lucky's fur again, gripping gently. The shepherd wagged his tail once, then settled back, nose pointed toward the drifting current. Jeremy nodded, his voice low. That's the river's gift. It carries weight away. The boy sighed happily, his eyes closing for a moment, as if memorizing the sound of water and the warmth of the dog beside him. Jeremy watched them both, the boy finally laughing, the shepherd keeping silent vigil. The weight in his chest eased into something steadier, lighter. For the first time in a long while, hope felt like more than a fragile word. The path ahead wasn't finished. But here by the river, they had found something worth keeping. The river slowed as twilight settled, its surface brushed with streaks of pink and amber. Cicadas buzzed in the trees, their chorus fading with the sun. Calvin lay sprawled on the grass, his breathing, even his thin fingers still tangled in Lucky's fur. Jeremy watched from a step back, letting the quiet work its way into the boy's bones. Months of fear had left their mark, but here by the river, healing had begun in whispers instead of thunder. Calvin stirred, lifting his head just enough to rest his hand on Lucky's crown. The shepherd tilted his head slightly, accepting the touch without moving. The boy's lips parted, his voice a murmur carried on the breeze. Safe. Home. Jeremy felt the words settle deep inside him. Not a declaration, not even a question. Just truth spoken as the boy understood it. 2 words that held more weight than any courtroom verdict, more light than any promise scribbled on paper. He crouched beside them, resting one hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "That's right," he whispered. "Safe. Home." Lucky wagged his tail once, slow and deliberate, then pressed his nose against Calvin's arm. The boy smiled faintly, his eyes drifting shut again. For the first time since Jeremy had found him under the willows, the child's rest looked peaceful. Jeremy stayed there until the cicadas quieted and the air cooled. His thoughts turned over the long road. Blood on basalt hospital halls, the echo of handcuffs. He had carried anger, frustration, doubt. Yet here was the answer, simple as a boy's laugh, steady as a dog's loyalty. The miracle had never been in the grand moments. It wasn't the gavel striking or the flash of sirens. It was this, a child leaning into a dog for comfort, a shepherd standing guard without command, a life rebuilt not by force, but by presence. Jeremy rose slowly, careful not to disturb Calvin. Lucky shifted, but only to keep his flank against the boy, a living shield, until the last light left the sky. Jeremy watched them both, a small smile breaking across his tired face. When Lydia came to gather Calvin, she found him still asleep in the grass, one hand resting in Lucky's fur. She paused, her eyes misting at the sight before carrying him gently toward the car. Calvin stirred, but did not wake. His fingers loosened only when Lucky stepped forward, brushing his nose against the boy's hand, as if to say, "I'll be here when you need me again." The car pulled away, taillights fading into the dusk. Jeremy and Lucky remained by the riverbank. The officer stood tall. His cap tilted back, the shepherd, sitting steady at his side. Together they watched the water roll on, slow and endless, carrying with it the weight of the past. Jeremy's hand dropped to Lucky's head. The dog leaned into it, steady, unyielding. "We did our part," Jeremy murmured. "Now we keep watch." The river glimmered with the last light, wrapping the 2 of them in its quiet song. Beside him, Lucky's amber eyes reflected both dusk and promise. They stood as sentinels, not just for Calvin, but for every fragile piece of hope that needed guarding. The boy had whispered the word, safe, home, and Jeremy knew that was enough. In the end, it wasn't about erasing every shadow. It was about making sure the light stayed within reach. So on that riverbank, man and dog held their post. Keepers of trust, protectors of a boy's childhood, guardians of a promise that would not break. The story of Calvin, Jeremy, and Lucky is more than a tale of hardship and survival. It is a reminder of the quiet strength that can rise from loyalty, compassion, and the bond between humans and animals. A boy once lost in fear found his way back to laughter, because a German shepherd chose to stand by his side. That presence was not loud, not dramatic, but constant. And sometimes constancy is the greatest miracle of all. German shepherds have long been celebrated for their intelligence, discipline, and courage. Yet what shines brightest in Lucky is not only his training, but his heart. He became a guardian without command, a friend without condition, and a bridge between pain and hope. His watchful eyes and silent reassurance carried more weight than words, showing us how animals can touch places in the human spirit that even justice cannot reach alone. This story also speaks to the responsibility we hold, for children, for family, for the voiceless. It is a call to recognize that silence in the face of harm allows shadows to grow. But courage, even in small steps, can bring healing. For every reader, the message is simple. Love is powerful when it is steady. Protecting the vulnerable, standing by the broken, and cherishing the trust of those who depend on us. These are the values that give life meaning. May Lucky's loyalty remind us to see animals not only as companions, but as partners in the journey of resilience. And may Calvin's smile by the river inspire us to believe that even after storms, a safe home and a hopeful tomorrow are possible. In the end, the greatest victories are not found in courts or headlines, but in the quiet